is not the first time we've been introduced to BINA. As a matter of fact, I owe an apology, both to Amir and to Naomi for really jumping the boat. I don't know, I wasn't here on Yom Ha'atzmaut, just because of a very heavy schedule. I was supposed to be, so I hope today I'll be able to compensate and maybe add a little more for not being there at that particular time. Another apology, I don't use PowerPoints. I believe the power is not to the point, the power is in the story. So that sounds. Now, watch very carefully when I make this presentation now, because I'm not just going to deliver a message, but I want you to follow the way I deliver, the way I switch. So, because that's part of the train. I don't like to lecture. I like to train people. I was trained in the paratroopers. You know, you make people jump out of airplanes. You saw that Sharon had that cliff, you know, where they do the free fall jumping from a cliff. Well, with me, you don't jump from cliff. You jump from 100-story buildings. But the point is to have the courage to do it, okay? And I think, therefore, I'm very happy of the distinguished speakers you had before me, because they really dealt with what we call in the military jargon, briefing or orders before battle. In other words, both Sasha and Dan and Sharon gave you really a very good presentation and very accurate way how to deal with the advocacy for Israel once you get there. My position and the purpose of my presentation is a little different. You know, as I said, in the military, there are three types of briefings a commander gives his troops. One is briefing before battle, and that you got. That was excellent. You got the best that money can offer, or the best that there is in the market. The other one is bitching and moaning. That you can do after I finish the lecture. Then you bitch and moan. That's the bitching and moaning presentation. The commander sits and the troops bitch and moan. That's a good thing to get pressure out. It's very important psychologically. The third one is a motivational or inspirational talk, which talks about the spirit of the commander, or how I view the whole thing. As I said, I was trained in the paratroopers, and I had a commander and a boss who was really the kind of person who mostly thought out of the box and allowed me also to think out of the box when we're doing things. I think one of the big story today of Israel, it does a lot of things out of the box, except maybe for advocacy for Israel. That we still do in the traditional way. And I really, no criticism leveled at the government. There are many things the government can do very well. And I think Sharon explained how they monitor, how they can provide the messages. But there's a lot of things in today's world that only you can do. Only you can do. And I wear my hat now as a strategic analyst and not as a media advisor. I was trained as a strategic analyst. First of all, the world is changing. I used that soundbite, you know, before I said, you know, times are changing. It's not government today. And in the past 20 years, all governments, both democratic and non-democratic, lost two main assets they had before. No more monopoly over the use of coercive power because of global terrorism, and no more monopoly over information. And the reason that there is this great loss over monopoly of information is because of this Facebook, because of this social networks. Now, one of the things I'd really like to make that, I'll make that as a point, and then I will follow into the presentation. It's not just a new way that people acquire information. By the way, how many of you learned about this conference from the BINA conversations? How many learned from other sources? Like what? What? The internet? Okay. I mean, this is just the first thing. In other words, the whole social media that you talk is a new way by which you acquire information. But that's only the tip of the iceberg to understand really the impact of the social networks and what they do is to look and understand the Arab Spring and the Israeli summer. This is not just passing information where the government cannot control information. And governments are afraid of that, not because of the fact that they don't have control over information, but they lost control over the ability to mobilize people. Social media mobilizes people to action. That's the great thing. That's why the Arab leaders
are afraid of it. Because in the past, the fear was the problem of the followers. And Arab regimes governed for 100 years or so since World War I by fear. The only country that didn't govern by fear is the country that is delegitimized for being an illegitimate state. It's the only legitimate state that governs by consent, by the people, for the people. All the others governed by fear, and it was fine as long as there was fear. One of the effects of the internet, the social networks, the social grouping, was that it removed the fear factor. Now, just for a minute, just to understand why it removed the fear factor and enabled people easier access to action, to take action. The crossing of the barrier of the fear factor happened because Facebook, Twitter, created a new type of solidarity. In the past, in order to have revolutions, you needed solidarity of the people. First of all, they need to feel solidarity with each other. So how was it? You had to organize them, bring them to the center of town. You have to organize rallies and protest. Today, you can skip that stage because there is cyber solidarity created by people who are on the same line, on the same flat world. And the cyber solidarity, particularly in countries that did not know democratic freedom like Arab countries, is so powerful and so destructive that the Arab regimes don't know how to handle it. You know why? Because if in 1982 the people of Hama were slaughtered, were killed, and nobody knew about it, nobody counted them, today if there are 20 or 15 or 10 casualties in Dara or in Hama or in Homs, the whole world knows about it. But that's just only one part of the picture. The other part of the picture is that the people who went there to die and keep going to die, they become icons. They are important now. They have friends who appreciate that. They are going to be on every television screen around the world, and the 3 million people will watch their death in the center of town. This is something that the Arab youth and the Arab young people didn't have it. Sharon said that 87% of people in the United States receive their information from the internet. In the Arab world, it's about 70% between the age of 19 and 29. They don't watch television. I had an exercise now in the IDF, a war game for preparation for the September tsunami, so to speak. And we established, the IDF is very advanced now, and after learning the lessons of the Marmara and all the lessons of the, I would say, the traps and the ambushes that we suffered in the past 20 years, established what they call a perceptual cyber warfare center. That we have people from all different walks, from social psychology, from military intelligence, who bring in information how to affect the perceptions of the enemy, how to affect just the perception of the enemy through the use of all these elements that we have, the communication elements, some of which were discussed today. And one of the things that we had to do is to try to understand what's going to happen if someone gets an order, get a message on Facebook with all the people, who are tied to this network to start marching on Jerusalem. And I asked the intelligence people, do you have good monitoring of it? I said, no, on some of it we have. We don't yet have good monitoring of it. It's a new force in politics. Daphne Leaf in Israel, and the people who run the demonstrations, whether in Tahrir Square in Egypt or whether it's in the periphery of Syria, in Dara or in Banyas or in Hama, share something in common. They are leaders propelled by this new cyber solidarity. Nobody knew about them before, but now they are the leaders. And they have the power, which they're learning, innocently how to use it. But social network, Facebook, is not just a book. It's not just information. It's face. It's faces. And faces with the book gives a story. And the ability of people to interact gives them a feeling that they're important. Now, if you were watching this very carefully, you didn't have to go to the Arab Spring or to the Israeli summer to learn about it. You could have learned it from Obama's campaign. What happened to these masses of 18 to 24, non-voters, non-participants? Oh, he communicated with them. And they answered. And they sent their $80, and he called them back, and he answered. And the most important thing is not that the most important thing is that they started participating. But why did they start participating? I'm important. I count. My name is important. I count. Look, he talks to me. I was on television before I left here, and they asked me, what do you think Netanyahu should have done? You know, they always said, you were advisor to Sharon. What would you advise Netanyahu to do? You know, now that he is facing this social protest in Israel. By the way, this is the most democratic, so I think Israel can take pride. He was right in take pride of it, because the only place where the social, I'd say the social effect, the social revolution of Facebook occurred without casualties. All other places, even in London, people are dying. In Israel, something to be said about the legitimacy of the Israeli democracy, the participation, the way Israel participates, and the maturity of the Israeli democracy. But so they asked me, what do you think Netanyahu should do? I said, don't listen to your advisor. Listen to your inner calling. Go talk to them. Go, first of all, before you talk, listen to them. Because one of the things why these revolutions started and why the Facebook forces that enabled it is because it's a medium where people listen to each other. Not just talk to each other, but listen. All the other measures of communication, television, radio, were passive, and nobody listened. They heard you maybe when you said something, but they didn't listen. And what do they cry in Israel? What do they cry in the streets of Dara? They say, listen to us. Listen, we have a different message. We have a different language. You've got to listen to that language. Now, I must admit, you know, I'm not of the age of Facebook. I think my sons understand it, all the intricacies and technicalities much better than me. But I can see the impact of it because I can compare it. What was it when we had passive media and when we have interactive media? So the power is in your hands. And as I said, because government does not have full control of the coercive power and full control over its territory, there's a lot of room for NGOs to do things without the government, based on your own initiative of tying things together. Israel faces today 4 major, I would say, either tsunami waves or revolutions, if you want, in 4 different spheres. And I divided them into the 4 seasons. One is the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring with the antecedent September tsunami wave. What will happen with the effort to delegitimize Israel in the UN? Well, it starts with a bang, will end with a whimper, but the after effects, you know, a tsunami wave, there was a first wave, and then there's the second wave that comes over. What would happen, if they say in Arabic, ba'den, after September, is much more critical. Well, they're not going to have a Palestinian state, but they'll try to spoil the Jewish state. In other words, make certain that the Jewish state is a pariah state. The Jewish state is a apartheid state. Oh, what can we do? I'll tell you, I'll give you just a little example, a story you can take. Abu Mazen said he wants a Palestinian state, a democratic state, but clean of settlers. Who invented apartheid? We? Abu Mazen. Palestinian style, made in Palestine, apartheid state, clean of Jews. Okay, God forbid, if we've said 2 states to 2 people, 1 Jewish state clean of Arabs, 1 Arab state clean of Jews, oh my God, where we would go. But he has the copyright. You got the copyright, Mr. Abu Mazen. You got the copyright on a Palestinian original apartheid state, discriminating against Jews, that no Jews will be in that state. You're not even saying as citizens or about, no, just out of it. So he played to the hands of those who want to use it. And you can play jokes on it, you can put in that, you can put a little skit on that, a little comedy story about it. All clean of Jews. There is a way to do it. By the way, when it is done not by the government, but by people like you who organize together, it has much more impact. Because one of the problems, I said, because government lost full monopoly over information and full monopoly over coercive force, and cannot manipulate information like it used to do before, is that the credibility is gone. The credibility of government information is gone. Maybe the government of Israel provides accurate information because it will not tell lies to its people. But other governments don't. And therefore, the overall credibility of what is called institutional information, or information that comes from institution, is suspect. Whereas when it comes from blogs, even if the government channeled that information into the blogs, it's much more reliable, much more credible. And Israel has the capacity to do it because Israel is a country that is not creating problems, but solving them in technology, and I think everybody knows about it. And then I'll just give you an example. There's every year here I switch into a story. Every year there's an aerospace convention, sometimes in France, sometimes Strasbourg, and they come over. And the Israelis, Israel is one of the 8 nations that had satellites up in the air, 15 of them. I think seven spy satellites and 8 geostationary, 40,000 kilometers above the equator for communication. Spy satellites go over the poles, and it's about 500 kilometers altitude. They come up, and one guy comes up and says, I can't understand. There's about several thousand satellites surrounding the globe, all going from east to west. The Israeli satellites, 15 of them go from west to east. Why? Because Israel is such a small country that when it had to launch its satellites, it doesn't want to launch them to the east over Arab territory, because the hostile territory. So it launches them to the west over the Mediterranean. Therefore, all the Israeli satellites go the opposite way than the other satellites. That's thinking out of the box. We cannot afford that parts of the satellites or parts of the missiles will fall in Arab territory, so we launch from east to west. That's just an example of how thinking out of the box. There are things that you can do, just not the right way, not the same way that everyone does, but still effective. By the way, the Israeli spy satellites are among the best in the world, second only to the United States KH series, and the rest you can't talk about. So the real issue. So here is the two. Talked about the two things. The one is the Arab Spring and the Israeli summer. But then there's another element which affects Israel very, very strongly today and in the foreseeable future, and that is, I call, the economic autumn. Because of the meltdown in the United States, because of the overbearing debts of the United States, this has a global ripple effect over all the economies of the world. And Israel, which is a leading economy, which learned to surf on top of these tsunami waves, would probably suffer if there is a major recession, because it's based on export. So that's another thing that we have to take into consideration. We consider, how Israel is going to present itself in the world and how Israel is going to explain. And definitely, if there was going to be an economic crisis on top of an effort to DBS Israel, divestment, that would be quite detrimental. It's a small country, and if tourism perhaps won't stop, but if the export stops, and the whole world goes into a recession, that will affect Israel very badly, and you have to prepare for that. And I think the fourth element, and that's the other element which we have to keep in mind and always integrate that into the story, is of course what I call the Iranian winter. After the Arab Spring comes the Iranian winter, hostile takeover of regimes that are weak. Not the bomb. The bomb is a problem, but beyond the bomb is that ability of the Iranians to use their proxies in order to gain control. And if Assad falls, or if Assad is reduced to a small enclave there, Iranian influence will increase in the region, because it will be able to actually keep him in place just by using their force, and Hezbollah, of course. And then, of course, the other scenario would be a scenario of war against Israel on the east, and on the north, and on the south, and that we have to avoid. But to come back to the point of the advocacy for Israel, you need to have a good story. And some of the stories are not stories that are produced by the government, but stories that you produce. What is the best story? Your best story is a story that has something that you tell, because no one can criticize you, no one, and you can also gain the interest of the audience. Everybody likes to hear a good story. People are tired of listening to messages. They hear them, but they don't listen. They will listen to a good story if it has a human element in it, if it has a story of something that you're involved, that you are eyewitness to, and you put it on the internet. And then you connect it to other blogs. Or you have, and I'm saying you don't need the government to do that. Because someone who's on Facebook, is on Twitter, on LinkedIn, you can connect them. You can connect all these things together. But the important element is to remember, you have a story, something that you were eyewitness to, that is part of you. That is something that can motivate other people to take action. You have to remember one thing. It's not just a new form of information gathering and information that gives you the strength. It's the what I call the cyber solidarity that this kind of network creates. People who don't know each other come and join together. The other night, I worked with Carolyn, and we saw this group of cyclists, coming out. I asked, how do they all get together? On the Facebook. They get a message, and they're all out in the streets, hundreds of them. See, this is something, a democracy can absorb it, but non-democratic countries can't, and they really fall apart on that. Rightly so, because they were not democratic, they didn't cater to the people. But this is a new force. It's a new force where you can mobilize people, not just to pass information, but also to take action, to come and join, to come and participate, to go to rallies. And the next phase of our Israel struggle against delegitimization will require also to be able to stand up at campuses and talk and organize people to do things, and that you can do. The government will help you, but you have to be there at the front line. You are that guy on the cliff. You are that guy on the cliff. You have a parachute. All I try to do is give you the motivation that if you jump, you're going to land safely. Israel has all the assets to ensure that you land safely. We are a winning enterprise. Last but not least, a winning enterprise, as Israel is, it must overcome its social problems. Because like in the military, we had always an exercise where two companies would compete with one another. Who reaches the final line, after a hike of about 20 miles with backpacks. And the point is, the whole company has to reach the finish line. It's not enough if the top reach. And I participated in these exercises. I was in good shape with several of them. And we were at the top of the column, and the rest of the column was behind us. Now, what do? You run, you got about half a mile to get back to the finish line. No, you go run back, and you push those behind to get to the finish line. For Israel to be a winning enterprise, the whole company must reach the finish line. It's not enough that the strong and agile will reach it, and that's our responsibility. Your responsibility is to ensure that Israel remains a winning society by selling its good points. Thank you.